I was out doing some yard work. I'm a little sweaty. I remembered I needed to get a couple more videos in, so I'm going to read the next chapter of The Borrowers. All right. When we last left off, Arrietty was talking to the boy outside, kind of realized some things maybe that she didn't want to realize, that there maybe aren't a lot of borrowers and there are a lot of people. So she calls them human beings, if you didn't catch that, instead of beings. So kind of a funny thing. And the boy wanted her to read to him, but they never quite got to that point. And then Pod came along and said they had to go. So that's where we kind of left off. Homily was there at the last gate to meet them. She had tidied her hair and smelled of coal tar soap. She looked younger and somehow excited. "Well," she kept saying. "Well," taking the bag from Arrietty and helping Pod to fasten the gate. "Well, was it nice? Were you a good girl? Was the cherry tree out? Oh, did the clock strike?" She seemed in the dim light to be trying to read the expression on Arrietty's face. "Come along now, tea's all ready. Give me your hand." Tea was indeed ready, laid on the round table in the sitting room, with a bright fire burning in the cogwheel. How familiar the room seemed, and homely, but suddenly, somehow strange. The firelight flickering on the wallpaper, the line which read, "It would be so charming if..." If what? Arrietty always wondered. Remember, the wallpaper is made out of a piece of paper someone wrote on, but it's sideways. So it says, "It would be so charming if," and then the paper stops at the top. So Arrietty gets to read that a lot, but she always wonders, if what? Arrietty always wondered. If our house were less dark, she thought, that would be charming. She looked at the homemade dips set in upturned drawing pins, which Homily had placed as candle holders among the tea things. The old teapot, a hollow oak apple, with its quill spout and wired-on handle, burnished it was now and hard with age. There were 2 roast sliced chestnuts, which they would eat like toast, with butter, and cold-boiled chestnut, which Pod would cut like bread. There was a plate of hot dried currants, well plumped before the fire. There were cinnamon breadcrumbs, crispy golden and lightly dredged with sugar, and in front of each place, oh delight of delights, a single potted shrimp. Homily had put out the silver plates, the fluorine ones for herself and Arrietty, and the half-crown one for Pod. Those are pieces of money that they're using as plates. "Come along, Arrietty. If you've washed your hands," exclaimed Homily, taking up the teapot. "Don't dream." Arrietty drew up a cotton spool and sat down slowly. She watched her mother pulling on the spout of the teapot. This was always an interesting moment, the thicker end of the quill being inside the pot. A slight pull just before pouring would draw it tightly into the hole, and thus prevent a leak. If, as sometimes happened, a trace of dampness appeared about the join, it only meant a rather harder pull and a sudden gentle twist. "Well," said Homily, gingerly pouring, "tell us what you saw." "She didn't see so much," said Pod, cutting himself a slice of boiled chestnut to eat with his shrimp. Didn't she see the overmantel?" "No," said Pod. "We never went in the morning room." "But what about my blotting paper?" "I never got it," said Pod. "Well, now that's a nice thing," began Homily. "Maybe," said Pod, munching steadily, "but I had my feeling. I had it bad." "Well, what's that?" asked Arrietty. "His feeling?" "Oh, up the back of his head and in his fingers," said Homily. "It's a feeling your father gets when," she dropped her voice, "there's someone about." "Oh," said Arrietty, and seemed to shrink. "That's why I brought her along home," said Pod. "Well, and was there anyone?" asked Homily anxiously. Pod took a mouthful of shrimp. "Must have been," he said, "but I didn't see nothing." Homily leaned across the table. "Did you have any feeling, Arrietty?" Arrietty started. "Oh," she said, "do we all have it?" "Well, not in the same place," said Homily. "Mine starts in the back of me ankles, and then me knees go. My mother, hers used to start just under her chin and run right round her neck. And tied in a bow at the back, said Pod, munching. No, Pod, protested Homily. It's a fact. No need to be sarcastic. All the bell pulls were like that. Like a collar, she said it was. Pity it didn't choke her, said Pod. Now, Pod, be fair, she had her points. Points, said Pod. She was all points. Arrietty moistened her lips. She glanced nervously from Pod to Homily. I didn't feel anything, she said. Well, said Homily, perhaps it was a false alarm. Oh, no, began Arrietty. It wasn't. And as Homily glanced at her sharply, she faltered. If Papa felt something, Perhaps, she went on, I don't have it. Now, she was just about to say that it wasn't a false alarm because she was talking to the boy, right? So Pod, there was somebody around, it's just Pod didn't see them. So she doesn't want to say that she saw the boy yet. Would you want to say if you saw somebody like that and you knew you weren't supposed to be talking to a big person if you're a borrower? Maybe not. Maybe she doesn't want to get in trouble. Well, said Homily, you're young. It'll come. All in good time. You go stand in our kitchen just under the chute when Mrs. Driver's raking out the stove upstairs. Stand right up on a stool or something, so you're fairly near the ceiling. It'll come, with practice. After tea, when Pod had gone to his workbench and Homily was washing up, Arrietty rushed to her diary. I'll just open it, she thought, trembling with haste. Anywhere. It fell open to the 9th and 10th of July. Talk of camps, but stay at home. Old Cameronian colors in Glasgow Cathedral, 1885. That's what it said for the 9th. And on the 10th, the page was headed, Make Hay While the Sun Shines. Snowdon Peak sold for £5,750 in 1889. Arrietty tore out this last page. Turning it over, she read on the reverse side, July 11th, Make Not a Toil of Your Pleasure. Niagara Passed by C.D. Graham on a Cask, 1886. No, she thought, I'll choose the 10th, Make Hay While the Sun Shines. And crossing out her last entry, Mother Out of Sorts, she wrote below it, Dear Uncle Hendreary, I hope you're quite well, and the cousins are well, and Aunt Lupe. We are very well, and I am learning to borrow. Your loving niece, Arrietty Clock. Write a letter on the back, please. What are you doing, Arrietty? Called Homily from the kitchen. Writing in my diary. Oh, said Homily shortly. Anything you want? Asked Arrietty. Oh, it'll do later, said Homily. Arrietty folded the letter and placed it carefully between the pages of Bryce's Tom Thumb Gazetter of the World, and in the diary she wrote, Went borrowing. Wrote to H, meaning Hendreary, talked to B, meaning the boy. After that, Arrietty sat for a long time, staring into the fire, and thinking, and thinking, and thinking. So the boy said, remember, he would take a letter to Uncle Hendreary, try to find where they live, and deliver it for her. So she wrote that letter, hoping that she'll get some kind of an answer. We'll see what happens.